Assalamu alaikum. On the behalf of Humanity Still Exists Foundation SKZMDC, I would now like to welcome you all to this exciting webinar. This webinar has been organized to highlight the importance of research in medical field and how to publish your research work. I am Nulan Rana and I will be your host for tonight. We have two honorable guests with us tonight, Shahir Mohammad Paracha and Mohammad 𝗥𝗘𝗦𝗘𝗥𝗖𝗛. Shahir is a graduate of University of Toronto with a bachelor's in neuroscience and is currently a second-year MBBS student at 𝗥𝗘𝗦𝗘𝗥𝗖𝗛 University. He worked as a research assistant at the Rotman Research Institute and would definitely share his experiences with you. Today, he will be giving us an introduction to the basics of research. I would now like to request our speaker to address the audience.
Perfect. Noor, does everything look okay?
Yes, it's fine. आवाज भी आ रही है आपकी.
Okay, perfect. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on the basics of research. First, I'd like to give a big thank you to Humanity Still Exists at Sheikh Zayed for inviting us. We're really excited about giving you guys this talk. So this talk is just going to be the very basics of research. We're going to be going over the essentials of it and how you can get started, in this field. We'll go over the different types of research and all the components that are involved in it. So just keep in mind, these are the very basic skills. And on top of this, you can build your own, this is the foundation for you to build your skills. So let's get started. I'm just gonna give a brief introduction about myself. So my name is Shahir. I am a graduate of the University of Toronto. I did a specialist in neuroscience. Currently, I'm a second-year student at 𝗥𝗘𝗦𝗘𝗥𝗖𝗛 University. And I did a 4-year bachelor's program at the University of Toronto, and my program was neuroscience. And since the start, it inculcated this sense of research, and the whole environment over there was based around research. So any new student that goes there, they get started from first year on how to read papers, write papers. So that was my journey over there. In my last 2 years, I actually worked at a neuroscience lab. So I was a research assistant over there. Our lab basically looked at EEG brain recordings. So we were recording the electrical activity of the brain. And based on that, we were seeing differences in pathological conditions or with healthy aging. So that's the prior experience I have. And so let's just get started with my presentation today. So if any new student wants to get into research, what's the first thing that they'll do? So the first thing they'll do is they'll go to Google, they'll look up what is research. And when they search that, Google will give them the dictionary definition. So the dictionary definition is that it's the investigation or experimentation aimed at the discovery and interpretation of facts, revision of accepted theories or laws in the light of new facts, or practical application of such new or revised theories. Now, looking at this definition, ये बहुत technical definition है, और इसमें जो है बंदे को देख के वो motivation नहीं मिलती, inspiration नहीं मिलती to actually pursue research, and they think that research जो है कुछ ज़्यादा ही complicated सी चीज़ है. But this is not, don't base your judgment on research based off of this. I'll give you another definition, where research is the curiosity of everything around you, motivating you to observe more, learn more, and change the world for the better. So in essence, this is what research is. Research में जो है आप, with the world around you, you're curious about it. आप जो है जानना चाहते हो उसके बाद, you want to learn more about it. And the way you learn more about it is कि आप उसको observe करते हो कि हो रहा क्या होता है आपकी दुनिया में. And ultimately, you want to change the world for the better. So that's the whole purpose of research. So before we get into the nitty-gritty stuff of research, कुछ assumptions होती हैं and कुछ goals होते हैं science में that we as researchers have to keep in mind. So assumptions are things that we take for granted, that we say कि अच्छा ये चीज़ें जो है already हैं science में. The first assumption is that the universe and human behavior is lawful and it's orderly. Matlab there are some principles and some laws जो defined होते हैं universe में, जिन पे जो है ना फिर second assumption आती है that this lawfulness is discoverable. कि आप जो है इन laws और इन principles को discover कर सकते हैं और interpret कर सकते हैं. And based on these assumptions, आपके जो है science के goals आते हैं. So the goals of doing research are, you want to understand what's going on in nature. Okay, that's the first goal. After you understand what's going on in nature, you want to predict what can happen in nature. ठीक है, आपने पहले understand कर लिया कि ये चीज़ें इस तरह हो रही हैं, फिर आपने predict करना है कि वो अगर एक चीज़ होगी तो क्या दूसरी चीज़ आगे जाके यही होगा, क्या outcome होगा उसका. And then lastly, you want to control events in nature. So taking into consideration that you understand events in nature, you can predict events in nature. So ultimately, you want to be in control of the environment around you. So let me give you an example for this. जो अभी recently COVID pandemic हुआ, उसमें at the start, what was our goal? Our goal at the beginning was to understand what was happening, to understand that this pandemic was due to a virus. That's how we found out कि ये जो है coronavirus है जो फैल रहा है दुनिया में, इसकी वजह से pandemic है. So that's how we understood the events in nature. Then we wanted to predict what would happen, कि ये virus इस तरह spread होगा, इस country में जाएगा. Predict करना था कि किसी को COVID होगा तो उसके कैसे symptoms होंगे. So we wanted to predict what was going to happen. And last but not least, we wanted to control the pandemic. हमने जो है research के through vaccines were developed, and the purpose of the vaccines was to control this pandemic. So that's where research and science really plays a big role. Let me give you guys another example. So we'll take the poliovirus, for example. So in 1894, Charles Caverly नाम का एक बंदा था US में, जिसने अपनी काउंटी में, अपने हॉस्पिटल में देखा था कि there was this new nervous system disease, and he reported it. उसने जो है एक research article निकाली, he proposed कि जो है ये एक endemic है. So the first US polio endemic was discovered in 1894, लेकिन तब किसी को पता नहीं था कि ये है क्या. It was just this new disease. Then we go forward to 1908. 1908 में जो है there were other researchers, Karl Landsteiner and Erwin Popper. इन्होंने अपनी research के through identify किया that this nervous system disease was caused by poliovirus. It was a complete different set of scientists in 1908 that did this. फिर उसके बाद there were many more researchers जिन्होंने जो है, और they did further research जिससे we identified the methods of transmission, pathophysiology of the virus. And then they also suggested ways with which to combat the virus, which led us to 1953, जिसमें Jonas Salk and his team developed their poliovirus vaccine. And because of this, then vaccine trials started. And 1955, there was another team of researchers who were tasked with seeing कि ये virus effective है कि नहीं है, and they found this to be 80 to 90% effective. And because of this, large-scale vaccination occurred, and that brings us to 2022, jahan pe poliovirus is almost eradicated from the world. So in this entire timeline, you can see that there was a lot of different scientists jo involved the, different scientists ki different kind of research thi, and every piece of research was as important as the next. And little by little, with research, little by little, we got to a point where we can eradicate polio from the world. So that is the importance of basic research. So next, why should you, as a medical student, do research? Why should you get into research? Obvious answer तो है कि CV build करनी है, बाहर अगर जाना है US वगैरह में अच्छी रेजिडेंसी ढूंढनी है, तो उसके लिए जो है अच्छी CV चाहिए होती है, रिसर्च चाहिए होती है. That is the obvious answer. No doubt काफ़ी लोगों का जो है यही motivation होती है, but it's actually much more than that. With research, it helps you become a critical thinker. Critical thinking skills are very, very important, especially in the field of medicine. कि आपके पास अगर कोई patient present हो रहा है, you need to be able to critically think what could be happening, how it could be happening, and what you can do to fix it. So to develop these skills, research helps a lot. And because you are a medical student and you're going to be pursuing, hopefully, you're going to be a doctor, you're at an advantage because of your profession. So aap jo hai, you're going to be exposed to a certain population of patients that have a disease that you have access to. And because of that access, that puts you at an advantage. कि आपके पास आप उन पे जो है उनकी डिजीजेस पे उनके जो है ट्रीटमेंट्स वगैरह पे आप रिसर्च कर सकते हैं. So that gives you that advantage. And lastly, research is important for you because it helps you learn about what's new and upcoming in your field. So new ideas in your field, new philosophies in your field, and especially new technologies in your field, because the field of medicine, it's growing a lot. और नई टेक्नोलॉजीज आ रही हैं हमारी फील्ड में, एंड टू स्टे अप टू डेट ताकि आप जो है पीछे ना रह जाएं, keeping up to date with research is very important. All right, so that's why you should do research. So now, how do you start to get into this mindset? Because abhi, let's say there's a person who has had no background with research, no exposure to research. आप शुरू कैसे करें? So the first step that you should do is you should find any topic that interests you. कोई भी topic ले लें. जैसे for me, it was neuroscience. I was really interested in neuroscience. So let's take that as an example. ठीक है? Then you're going to go on to these open source databases. जिस तरह ये Google Scholar होता है और ये PubMed होता है, और उस पे जाके आप बस you're going to type in, like you're going to search, type in करें जो भी topic है जो आपको interesting लगता है, और उस पे ढेर सारी articles आएंगी on that specific topic कि research कैसे पहुंची यहाँ तक, how did we identify, let's say अगर कोई disease है, how did we identify that disease, उसके symptoms वगैरह क्या हैं, and basically you're going to go through these databases, you're going to find papers और आप उनको पढ़ें. ठीक है? Just go through them however you can. You read through them, you try to retain as much information as you can from these research papers. At first, it's very difficult to read a research paper, like with time, it gets easier. And then there's three main things that you should focus on in a research paper. Introduction होती है research paper की, जहाँ पे authors आपको background information देते हैं कि उन्होंने ये experiment क्यों की. The second thing that you should focus on is the methods, कि authors ने किया क्या, research में जो है experiment क्या हुई और वो उन्होंने कैसे की. And then the last thing that you should focus on is the discussion, कि जब उनको results आ गए, results मिल गए, कि उन्होंने उसको interpret कैसे किया, उन्होंने क्या कहा कि इसका क्या मतलब क्या है और आगे क्या होगा इन results की वजह से. And then because you're going to be reading a lot of papers in the field that interests you, आपके ideas develop होंगे. आपको जो है आप देखेंगे कि एक चीज़ है जो researchers ने target नहीं की हुई, and that would then be the basis of for starting your own research. Discussions में जो है researchers बताते हैं कि ये चीज़ अभी नहीं discover हुई हुई. So you can take those ideas and you can potentially start your own research in that specific topic. Okay, so before you delve into doing your own research, you need to know a couple of things. The first thing that you need to know is किस तरह की research होती है. Research की, there's a lot of different types of research. The first type of research is qualitative. Qualitative research में क्या होता है कि it's dealing with abstract ideas. It's dealing with words, paragraphs, लोगों की thoughts, लोगों की experiences, लोगों की perceptions. और आप उनसे जो है you're asking them questions. इसमें कोई numbers वगैरह involved नहीं होते. इसमें आप लोगों की opinions ले रहे होते हैं. One type of qualitative research is if you want to examine the effects of sleep deprivation on mood. तो आप उनसे पूछेंगे कि आपका mood कैसा होता है जब आप sleep deprived होते हैं, and they'll give you sentences as answers. So that's qualitative research. The other type of research is quantitative. Now, quantitative research में जो है सारे numbers involved होते हैं. आपके पास variables होते हैं, कुछ independent variables होते हैं जो जिनको आप चेंज करते हैं, कुछ डिपेंडेंट वेरिएबल्स होते हैं जो आपके आउटकम्स होते हैं कि आपने एक इंडिपेंडेंट वेरिएबल को चेंज किया टू सी व्हाट हैपेंस टू योर डिपेंडेंट वेरिएबल. इसमें जो है आपके काफ़ी स्टैटिस्टिकल एनालिसिस होते हैं, स्टैट्स के टेस्ट्स होते हैं जिनके बारे में हम आगे बात करेंगे थोड़ी सी वेरी ब्रीफली. बट quantitative research has everything to do with numbers and data. There's two types of quantitative research. The first one is observational. Observational में जो है आप जो है जो भी outcome हो रहा होता है आप सिर्फ उसको measure कर रहे होते हैं. You're not changing anything in the environment. जिस तरह हो रहा है everything is happening that way. You're just observing कि effects क्या हो रहे हैं, outcome क्या हो रहा है. The other type of research is experimental. In experimental research, you're actively changing a factor. जिस तरह आप कोई एक एक्सपेरिमेंट कर रहे हैं टू सी व्हाट इफेक्ट इफ यू चेंज अ सर्टेन थिंग कि उसकी क्या इफेक्ट होगी आउटकम में. तो दैट इज एक्सपेरिमेंटल रिसर्च. नाउ इफ वी टेक ऑब्जर्वेशनल रिसर्च जिसमें जो है आप सिर्फ ऑब्जर्व कर रहे होते हैं, यू आर नॉट चेंजिंग एनीथिंग, उसमें देयर इज मेनी डिफरेंट स्टडीज. And when you get down to doing your own research, you'll realize which one of these specific researches you are doing. And that's very important. The first type of observational study is a cross-sectional study. In a cross-sectional study, आपके पास individuals हैं, लोग हैं, और आप सिर्फ ये देख रहे हैं कि उन लोग में एक कोई disease है, तो कितने लोगों में disease है. कितने लोगों में disease है, that means prevalence. आप जो है क्रॉस सेक्शनल स्टडी में एक डिजीज की सिर्फ प्रेवलेंस देख रहे होते हैं एट अ सर्टेन पॉइंट. और इस क्रॉस सेक्शनल स्टडी में यू कांट क्या कहते हैं प्रूव कॉजालिटी. कॉजालिटी का मतलब है कि वन थिंग इज कॉजिंग अनदर थिंग. सो इन अ क्रॉस सेक्शनल स्टडी यू कांट प्रूव कॉजालिटी. आपके पास सिर्फ उस टाइम पॉइंट का नंबर है कि ये इतने लोगों को ये डिजीज है, जैसे कि प्रेवलेंस ऑफ लेट्स से डायबिटीज इन 500 इंडिविजुअल्स. So that is a cross-sectional study. Then you have an ecological study. Ecological study जो है cross-sectional study जैसी ही होती है, but instead of individuals, क्या आपने देखा था कि 500 लोगों में कितना diabetes है? In ecological studies, you're looking at whole populations, whole groups. So in this example, you're seeing the prevalence of diabetes in different cities. इसमें जो आपका basic unit है वो individual नहीं है, वो एक city है. So that's an ecological study. Then you have a case report. Case report जो है वो काफ़ी common है. It's one of the easiest, relatively easiest research to write. In a case report, you're just looking at one single case, any unique case that presents to you, और आप उस case के बारे में सारी details लिख रहे हैं कि उन्होंने how did that case present, उसकी क्या clinical manifestations थी, कैसे treatment वगैरह हुई. So you're just writing a little story about a case. That's a case report. An example of a case report is John Marlowe's case on Phineas Gage. So Phineas Gage was a railroad construction worker, and that railroad construction worker, एक accident हुआ था जिसकी वजह से there was a rod that went through his head, but that didn't kill him. It only changed his behavior. And so John Marlowe did a case report on him, on basically how he presented. The next is case series. So case series is like a case report, but rather than it being a story of one person, it's a group of people who have the same disease, but their clinical presentations वगैरह सारी similar होती हैं. So it's basically like a bunch of case reports on the same disease. And then we have the two major observational studies that are cohort studies, and then we'll have case control studies. But for cohort studies, what you're seeing is कि एक एक्सपोजर, किसी चीज से एक्सपोजर, डज इट, उसका एक आगे डिजीज आने में क्या एसोसिएशन है. ठीक है, कि पहले अगर आप दो तरीकों से ये चेक कर सकते हैं. या तो आप अभी एक टाइम अभी को देखें कि कितने लोगों को डिजीज है, और आप यू गो बैक इन टाइम. ठीक है, यू गो बैक इन टाइम टू सी कि उनको क्या एक्सपोजर हुआ था. Or what you can do is you can see who gets exposed right now, and then you can go forward in time to see कि किसको disease हो रहा है. So when you're going back in time to see the exposure, that's retrospective cohort. When you're going forward in time to see the disease happening, that's a prospective cohort. And lastly, you have case control studies. Case control studies में आप जो है, you're going to be taking people who have a certain disease and people who don't have a certain disease. The people who have the disease are known as cases, and without are known as controls. और आप जो है उनके पीछे जाके risk factors देख रहे होते हैं to see if a potential risk factor has any relationship with their disease outcome. कि disease हुआ या नहीं हुआ. So it's kind of like a retrospective cohort study. So you're going to be, when you're going through different kinds of research, you're going to be seeing these different kinds of studies, and just try to see if you can identify कि किस तरह की study हो रही है. And if there's a type of study that you really like, you can क्या कहते हैं, go forward. जब आप अपनी research करना चाहेंगे, you can do that kind of a study. So these were all observational studies. Now we'll move on to the experimental studies. If you remember, experimental studies वो थी जिनमें आप actively एक experiment कर रहे होते हैं, कोई चीज़ change कर रहे होते हैं. So the gold standard of experimental studies is randomized control trial. Gold standard क्यों है? क्योंकि इसमें आप randomly assign कर रहे हैं लोगों को into an experimental group and a control group. ये जो random assignment है, इसकी वजह से कोई potential bias जो होता है ना, वो eliminate हो जाता है. कि अगर researcher की कोई preference है कि इस तरह के individuals का उसको पता है कि better outcome होगा, तो वो उन individuals को experimental group में डाल देगा ताकि उसकी study show करे कि हाँ, there was a big effect. But क्या कहते हैं, जो control जो randomly assign होता है ना, उसमें जो है उसमें ये सारे biases eliminate हो जाते हैं. So in a randomized control trial, the experimental group जो है उसको आप एक intervention देंगे, whereas the control group will not receive that intervention, and then you will see what the outcome is of both the groups. So for example, if you want to test the efficacy of a new drug, so the controls, जो experimental group है उसको आप एक नई drug देंगे, and controls को जो है एक placebo देंगे. So the other type is non-randomized control trial. So there are some instances जहाँ पे you can't randomly assort participants, and it especially happens जब कोई एक drug हो, वो life-saving drug हो, और उसमें आपको patient की consent चाहिए होती है कि आप जो है उनको ये नई drug दें. And in that, the patient knows, जो randomized control trial होती है, उसमें patient को नहीं पता होता कि उसको कौन सी drug मिल रही है, या experimental drug है या placebo है, they don't know. But in a non-randomized control trial, they have the choice to choose whether they want the new drug or the old treatment. तो इसमें जो है potential biases आ जाते हैं, लेकिन it's also a type of experimental study. So these were all the different types of studies that you'll see when you go out and you explore research papers. Now, the best type of research, the pinnacle of research, is meta-analysis. Meta-analysis ये होती है कि आप ढेर सारे पेपर्स लेते हैं. कुछ पेपर्स जो हैं क्वालिटेटिव स्टडीज़ होती हैं, कुछ पेपर्स क्वांटिटेटिव स्टडीज़ होती हैं. आप सारे पेपर्स लेके कंबाइन करते हैं और उन सब की कंक्लूजन्स को लेके आप एक सिंगल कंक्लूजन बनाते हैं. सो दैट्स वाई इसकी वजह से दिस इज़ रिगार्डेड एज द बेस्ट काइंड ऑफ रिसर्च, बिकॉज यू हैव इसकी जो कंक्लूजन होती है मेटा एनालिसिस की, वो ज़्यादा पावर रखती है, क्योंकि इसमें आपके ना सिर्फ सब्जेक्ट्स ज़्यादा होते हैं, पार्टिसिपेंट्स ज़्यादा होते हैं, क्योंकि आप कंबाइन कर रहे होते हैं डिफरेंट स्टडीज़, बट ऑल्सो देयर इज़ ग्रेटर डाइवर्सिटी इन द सब्जेक्ट्स, क्योंकि अब आप पेपर्स हर जगह से ले रहे हैं, यू आर टेकिंग पेपर्स फ्रॉम डिफरेंट पॉपुलेशंस, और उन सब का मिला के रिजल्ट आपको मिलता है. सो दैट्स वाई दे हैव ग्रेटर स्टेटिस्टिकल पावर. इसकी सिग्निफिकेंस मेटा एनालिसिस की ज़्यादा होती है. तो एग्जाम्पल है कि does physical activity during pregnancy prevent postpartum depression? So ISME, there were 17 studies that were included. And out of those 17 studies, they got almost 94,000 women. Now, each single study would not have this many participants. ये सिर्फ क्योंकि इन्होंने ये सारी 17 studies combine की हैं, that they got 94,000 women, जो अच्छा खासा एक sample size है जिसपे जो है आप अच्छी conclusion निकाल सकते हैं. And then now we'll move on to statistics. So over here, I'm gonna give a very basic overview of the different, the major statistical tests that we use. There's a lot of statistical tests that are out there in the field, but here are just a few of the basic ones. And in order to do research, आपको जो है थोड़ा बहुत आइडिया होना चाहिए कि किस तरह की स्टेटिस्टिक्स यूज़ हो रही हैं, कैसे यूज़ होती हैं और कहाँ यूज़ होती हैं. सो बट ये सारा कुछ जो है ना आपको एक्सपीरियंस के थ्रू आएगा. आपको जो है आप ज़्यादा रिसर्च पेपर्स पढ़ेंगे तो आपको पता चलेगा कि इस तरह की स्टैट्स यूज़ हो रही हैं, इस तरह की स्टैट्स करने से इस तरह के रिजल्ट्स आते हैं, और इन स्टैट्स को इस रिसर्चर ने इस वजह से किया. सो द बेसिक स्टैट्स जो सबसे बेसिक होती हैं वो मीन मीडियन मोड. वी हैव बीन डूइंग दिस फॉर अ व्हाइल, काफ़ी अरसे से करते आ रहे हैं, हर किसी को पता होता है मीन मीडियन मोड का. बट these things they just summarize the data. ठीक है, एक आपको सिर्फ समरी देते हैं कि आप कितने पार्टिसिपेंट्स थे, उनकी मीन ये थी. ये आपको ये नहीं बताता कि अगर दो ग्रुप्स हैं उनके दरमियान डिफरेंस क्या है. आप सिर्फ मीन को देख के ये नहीं कह सकते कि हाँ ये ग्रुप डिफरेंट है इस ग्रुप से. इट जस्ट टेल्स यू अ समरी ऑफ उस ग्रुप का मीन. ठीक है, ये एक सिर्फ समरी वैल्यू देती है. बट थ्रू मीन आप दो तरीकों के टेस्ट कर सकते हैं, टी टेस्ट and z-test. You'll see these used a lot. So that's why I wanted to mention it. T-test और z-test दोनों में आप दो ग्रुप्स कंपेयर कर रहे होते हैं, दो ग्रुप्स. और आप ये देखना चाहते हैं कि इन दोनों ग्रुप्स के दरमियान कोई डिफरेंस है या नहीं है. मैंने अगर कोई एक्सपेरिमेंट किया है तो उसकी वजह से इन दो ग्रुप्स में कोई डिफरेंस आया है आउटकम में या नहीं आया. तो टी-टेस्ट जो है आप यूजुअली यूज़ करते हैं छोटे से सैम्पल साइज हो, अगर आपके पास लोग कम हो आपकी स्टडी में. जी टेस्ट आप यूज़ करते हैं अगर आपकी स्टडी में लोग ज़्यादा हों, व्हेन यू हैव अ लार्ज सैम्पल साइज. टी टेस्ट की एक और वो होती है, रिक्वायरमेंट होती है कि आपके पास पॉपुलेशन वेरिएंस नहीं होती. पॉपुलेशन वेरिएंस का क्या मतलब है? इट बेसिकली मीन्स कि आपकी पूरी पॉपुलेशन में, द होल पॉपुलेशन में लोगों की जो वैल्यूज़ हैं वो कितनी स्प्रेड आउट है. So that is population variance. But when you go into learning more about these stats, you will get to know why t-test use hota hai, when you use a z-test. So this all comes with experience and learning more about stats. Over here, we'll just go over the basics just to show you कि ये stats use होती है. The next statistical analysis we have is ANOVA. अब ANOVA में अब t-test और z-test दोनों में सिर्फ 2 groups compare कर सकते हैं. But if you have 3 or more groups, and if you want to know if any of them are different, then you use an ANOVA. So that's the basis of using an ANOVA. और इसकी अलग statistical analysis है, इसकी अलग theory है, but we're not going to go into that detail. Then we have regressions. Regression में अब ये होता है कि आपके पास independent variables हैं जो आप change कर रहे हैं, ठीक है? Any variable you're changing, और आपका एक outcome होता है जो आपका dependent variable होता है. And in order to find कि you changing your independent variable, does it have any impact on your dependent variable, कि क्या वो dependent variable ज़्यादा हो रहा है या कम हो रहा है, that you find through regression. So that's the basics of regression. And as I said, there's a lot more statistical analysis, और जितनी ज़्यादा fields हैं उतनी ज़्यादा statistical analysis हैं. कुछ analyses हैं जो specific field of research के लिए हैं, जिस तरह I talked about me working in an EEG lab. उधर हमारे पास brain की electrical activity record होती थी, and it had a completely different set of statistical analysis that we could do on it. So depending on the type of data you're collecting, depending on what you want to find out, there's different statistical tests that you use. And again, like I said, experience ke saath aata hai. So you just need to get started and it'll come to you. So now I'll get to the final part of my presentation. It's on how you can get started with your own research project. So now we talked about what research is, components kya hote hain research ke, how you can get yourself exposed to research. And after all that, if you want to start your research project, these are the steps that you'll have to take. So the very first step is you need to find a gap in current literature. Gap का मतलब ये है कि कोई ऐसी चीज़ है जो अभी तक या तो discover नहीं हुई भी, या it hasn't been talked about, it hasn't been experimented on. So in order to find this gap in research, you need to follow the steps that we talked about pehle. Okay, you take the topic of your interest, you read up on what's going on currently in that field, you especially go through the discussions, you see कि authors क्या कह रहे हैं, अच्छा ये हमारा data था, ये हमारी interpretation है, अब आगे हम ये कर सकते हैं. So try to see what authors are saying कि आगे की future directions क्या हैं, and based on all of that, see if something hasn't been explored before, and that you can design a research idea that can tackle this. So that's how you come up with an idea for your research. Now, if you have aapko idea mil gaya, the next step is to find a principal investigator. Principal investigator is a mentor जो expert होता है research में, especially in your field, who will guide you through the whole process, who will take you through the whole process. Especially as a new researcher, it is very important to find a principal investigator who will guide you through the whole process of writing the research paper. And how do you find a principal investigator? You reach out to your professors, reach out to scientists, reach out to doctors in your field of interest, and you pitch them your idea as a new research project that you can do with them. It takes a lot of time. Kafi rejections aati hain yahan pe, but just keep on trying. It's always the sabr ka phal hamesha meetha hota hai, and just try to find a person in your field of interest who you can do this research project with. Then say you have secured a principal investigator. Then what you're going to do is you're going to do literature review. Literature review का मतलब ये है कि आप जाओगे, जो आपका specific आपने एक topic बना लिया ना, अब ये आपने research करना है, उसकी आपने basis define करनी है कि आप ये research क्यों करना चाह रहे हो. आपने जो है define करना है कि ये research हो चुकी है, ये रिसर्च पे ये हुआ, इस रिसर्च में ये हुआ, लेकिन अभी तक इस तरह की कोई जो मैं करना चाह रहा हूँ इस तरह की कोई रिसर्च नहीं हुई. ठीक है. So it builds your background knowledge on your topic, which you will use in writing your paper as well. But it also, एक और जो very important चीज़ होती है literature review में, you find out कि similar studies अगर किसी ने पहले की भी हैं तो उन्होंने कैसे की थी, and finding out कि उन्होंने कैसी की थी, you can use how they did their experiment to do your own experiment. So that's what you're going to do, literature review. And then after that, you're going to establish your test subjects, their criteria, and who your controls are. So now, to do your experiment, you need to be doing it on a certain population of people. And it depends, क्या आप पेशेंट्स पे करना चाहते हैं, क्या स्पेसिफिक कोई डिजीज़ के पेशेंट्स हैं, या कोई नॉर्मल पॉपुलेशन में आप करना चाहते हैं. बट टू डिफाइन कि आप किन लोगों पे ये एक्सपेरिमेंट कर रहे हैं, यू हैव सर्टेन इंक्लूजन क्राइटेरिया एंड यू हैव एक्सक्लूजन क्राइटेरिया. इंक्लूजन क्राइटेरिया होता है कि अगर पार्टिसिपेंट में ये फीचर्स हैं, सो वी आर गोना इंक्लूड देम इन आवर स्टडी. एंड लाइकवाइज एक्सक्लूजन क्राइटेरिया ये होता है कि अगर पार्टिसिपेंट में ये फीचर्स हैं, सो वी आर गोना एक्सक्लूड देम फ्रॉम आवर स्टडी. एंड देन आफ्टर दैट you need to have, there are certain experiments जिसमें controls नहीं होते, but काफ़ी experiments में you need to have controls. You need to be testing your certain, let's say, patient population against a population that is क्या कहते हैं, normal, let's say. ठीक है? So you need to be comparing this to something so that you know क्या कहते हैं कि कोई difference आ रहा है in your patient population versus not. So you need to, based on your research design, you will figure out if you need controls and who is classified as a control. So after this, what you're going to do is you're going to identify the type of data you're going to collect. What is your data going to be? क्या आपने experiment अगर करनी है, आपने वो experiment कैसे करनी है? So what methods you will use to collect it? And then on that data, what statistical analysis you're going to run. So this, you can really get an idea of how to do your experiment based on previous research. Through your literature review, you can see how other people did it, or you can come up with your own strategy. You can work with, let's say, your principal investigator. If they know how to do things a certain way, you can definitely take their strategy. But over here, you need to clearly define कि आपने अपनी एक्सपेरिमेंट में करना क्या है, कि आपकी एक्सपेरिमेंट होगी कैसे, उस एक्सपेरिमेंट की वजह से आपको डेटा क्या मिलना है, जो रॉ डेटा होगा, और उस रॉ डेटा पे आपने किस तरह का स्टैटिस्टिकल एनालिसिस रन करना है. And for this, you need to have just a basic understanding of the statistical tests that are being used. And that's why this is very important. So after this step, after you've identified what you're going to collect, the methods you're going to use, then you're going to develop your hypothesis. And you're going to state what you expect to happen. So you're going to come up with the expectations of your study. और जब आप hypothesis लिख रहे होते हैं, hypothesis होती है कि basically what you expect is going to happen in your study. There's one thing you need to be very careful of, is that your hypothesis needs to be falsifiable. Falsifiable का मतलब है that your hypothesis can be proven wrong. And in the scientific method की ही बुनियाद पे सारी research होती है. This is a very, very important core concept. कि your hypothesis can either be proven or it can be disproven. So you're going to write out your hypothesis. आप बताएंगे कि मैं ये expect करता हूँ, अगर ये इस तरह का result आया मेरा, तो this is what this means. और अगर इस तरह का result नहीं आया, तो this is what it means. After you've developed your hypothesis, the next very important step, so now this is a very important step, is you're going to write your study protocol. Before any research can commence, it needs to go through ethical review. Ethical review the whole point of it is to make sure that in your experiment there are no ethical boundaries or ethical rules or regulations that are being broken. And to do research, that is very, very important. So ये जो हमने पिछले steps में जो सारी चीजें बोली थी, all of that is going to go into your study protocol. Study protocol is going to go to an ethical review committee, and the ethical review committee will see whether or not to approve it. So there's many different ethical review committees. काफ़ी universities की अपनी होती हैं, जैसे यहाँ पे Al-Khan University has its own ethical review committee, but there's also broader ethical research ethical review committees. So you're gonna make your protocol based on all the information we talked about before. You're gonna write the protocol, and then you're gonna submit it for ethical review, and you're gonna wait for them to either accept it or not. After it gets accepted, then comes the fun part. Then you go and you run your experiment, you collect your data, you go out in the field or the lab. अगर आपकी experiment में service थे, अगर आपकी research में जो है कोई tests थे, lab reports, whatever it is, you're gonna go out into the field, you're gonna collect your data, and then you're gonna run the statistical analyses that you talked about in order to get your results. Now, what your results show, you're gonna interpret them. You're gonna tell people what you found, what you think it means, and all of this will go into your manuscript, your research article. And Murtaza will be talking more about that in the next section. But this is the major chunk of your research project. After you have written your research paper, then comes the step of publishing it in a journal. So after a long process of writing the paper, you look for a scientific journal जिसके अंदर आप ये अपनी article publish करेंगे. So there's a lot of different journals out there. ठीक है, आपकी research के आपके topic of interest की journals होंगी. जिस तरह for me neuroscience की, there's a lot of neuroscience journals. जिस तरह astrophysics की अलग journals होंगी. So there's a lot of different journals out there, and to differentiate between a good journal and a bad journal is based on their impact factor. Impact factor का ये मतलब होता है कि उस journal के अंदर जितनी भी research आ रही है, how much is that research impacting future research? So जितना ज़्यादा impact कर रही है future research को, it'll have a greater impact factor. The second thing that you need to look for is whether or not that journal is peer-reviewed. Peer-reviewed का मतलब ये होता है कि उस journal के अंदर कुछ experts होते हैं field के, who look at your research paper और बिल्कुल उसे A to Z पूरा scrutinize करते हैं to see कि आपने background information जो provide किया is it enough, आपकी जो methodology है वो ठीक है, आपके जो results हैं उसमें कोई वो तो नहीं है क्या कहते हैं, if you're hiding any results or not showing any results, and then क्या आपकी interpretation is your interpretation okay? Is your interpretation of the article okay? So they're going to go through this rigorous process. पूरा research paper आपको कहेंगे कि इसको आप दोबारा लिखें, आपको comments देंगे कि इस तरह यहाँ पे ये चीज़ change करें, यहाँ पे ये चीज़ change करें. It takes a long time. I remember one of my papers took over a year, and it usually takes a very long time to go through this peer review process. But you're going to be constantly revising and editing your research paper before it finally gets published. So these are all the steps that you need to take in order to do your own research project. So I'll leave you guys off with this quote that nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. And now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. And this was said by Marie Curie. And so thanks a lot, everyone, for listening. If you have any questions, आप लोग मुझे email भी कर सकते हैं, and you can find me on social media as well. But thanks a lot.
Okay, that was perfect. हमारे पास एक question है from Ibrahim Mohsin. वो पूछ रहे हैं कि I'm confused about the difference between retrospective cohort and case control. Please explain.
Okay, so retrospective cohort में जो है ना, आपकी जो participants आप recruit कर रहे होते हैं ना, उसमें you're not recruiting participants in any cohort study. You're not recruiting participants based on कि उनको disease है या disease नहीं है. Cohort study में आप बस एक general population को ले रहे होते हैं और आप फिर जाके देख रहे होते हैं कि पीछे exposure किस तरह हुआ था और क्या आगे disease हुआ था कि नहीं हुआ था. और केस कंट्रोल में होता है कि आप एक डिस्टिंक्ट पॉपुलेशन लेते हैं पार्टिसिपेंट्स की जिनमें डिजीज होता है, एंड यू टेक अ डिस्टिंक्ट पॉपुलेशन ऑफ पीपल दैट यू नो डिड नॉट हैव द डिजीज, and then you go back in time to see if there was a potential risk factor that was involved. So they're very similar. It is a bit confusing between the two, but the general difference between the two is this.
और मोहम्मद फ़ाइक अली पूछेंगे, कैन यू डू सिस्टेमिक रिव्यू विदाउट मेटा एनालिसिस?
So meta-analysis and systemic review जो हैं, they're very क्या कहते हैं, commonly कहते हैं, कुछ लोग कहते हैं कि they're the same thing, कुछ लोग कहते हैं कि they're not the same thing. But in general, a systemic review is you're doing a review of all the articles that are in क्या कहते हैं, you're just bringing all these articles together, whereas in a meta-analysis, you're analyzing their results, which you're not doing in a systemic review. Systemic review में आप सिर्फ papers इकट्ठे कर रहे हैं और आप सिर्फ लिख रहे हैं उसके बारे में, और meta-analysis में आप उन सब के results ले रहे हैं और उस पर analysis कर रहे हैं.
ओके, सो ये क्वेश्चंस थे. थैंक यू सो मच फॉर योर टाइम. बहुत अच्छा सेशन था. कोई भी क्वेश्चंस होंगे तो आपकी ईमेल है, आपको कांटेक्ट कर सकते हैं. थैंक यू सो मच.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so our next guest is Mohammad Murtaza Bukhari, who will be giving us an introduction to manuscript writing. He also graduated from University of Toronto with a distinction in immunology and is currently a second-year MBBS student at AKU.
Right. So thank you, Shay, for that wonderful, insightful session. And a big thank you to the HSE Society at 𝗥𝗘𝗦𝗘𝗔𝗥𝗖𝗛 Medical College, Lahore. Thank you for having us. Really happy to be here. And I hope I can share some useful information and tips regarding manuscript writing. Before I get to the mechanics of manuscript writing, I'd like to talk about my research journey. Nobody's born a researcher. Research is something that takes a very long time to get a hold of, and you go from learning how to read a research paper to then being able to develop your own research ideas, work on your own project, and then publishing it. So my research journey began when I moved to Canada, or the first picture that you see on the slide looks pretty much like the first assignment that I got. And this was the very first research article that I ever read. And I didn't even have to read all of it. It had highlighted sentences and paragraphs that we were asked to summarize, and there were questions alongside it. और मुझे याद है कि it took me more than half a day just to get through those highlighted sections, not even the entire paper, just the highlighted parts of it. क्योंकि उससे पहले ना कभी research article देखा था और पढ़ने का तो बिल्कुल भी अंदाजा नहीं था. So there were a lot of these assignments, and flash forward to first year of university. कल तक मतलब जिसको research article पढ़ना नहीं आता था, now the expectation was that we were expected to critique a research article. Okay, we were supposed to think about good methodology, bad methodology, why the researchers did what they did, what could they have done differently, and what were the shortcomings or limitations of that research article. And it wasn't until my second year that I wrote my first ever manuscript. And there's a picture of it, third picture that you see. It was a literature review on Lou Gehrig's disease. Iske liye I had to read 50 to 60 articles and then summarize the findings of the research community on the disease, what work was being done, what were the advancements, and what was the future direction regarding the research on the disease. Or third year mein jaake, finally I got myself involved with a research project, a real world research project. The research idea, design, none of it was my own. It was my professor's. Like, and I worked on the experiments, and I helped with the manuscript writing. Or finally, in my final year, I was able to acquire an independent research project. So the whole point of this is that this process, unfortunately, does not exist in Pakistan. Students here, they have to teach themselves how to do research. And research opportunities are very hard to come by. So in countries with an established research culture, जिनमें जहाँ ये process exist करता है, उधर your textbook education, your academic program, कुछ भी हो, physics, neuroscience, immunology, it runs alongside the research aspect of it. एक designated research building या lab है जहाँ पे उसकी recent advances study की जा रही हैं. तो वो gap नहीं रहता इतना between textbook and research. So that helps a lot. लेकिन unfortunately Pakistan में ये नहीं है. And the most obvious reason is कि it's expensive. It takes millions of dollars to establish this process, to establish a research culture. लेकिन that isn't the only reason. I think कि अगर पैसे होते भी तो शायद हम ना लगाते research में, क्योंकि we don't recognize the importance of it. We only recognize one aspect of its importance. Well, frankly speaking, which is why we're all here, कि research looks good on a resume. It's a CV building exercise. Or fair game, matlab, it definitely is. Lekin the thing is that when we're applying for residency spots या किसी भी research program में apply कर रहे हैं, there's a reason why they value research experience, why they expect their applicants to have research experience. And when we think about why they value it, that's where the other 4 points on the slide come in. सबसे पहले point number 4, it teaches us important reading, writing, and critical reasoning skills. मतलब it teaches you to read, write, and think like a scientist. तीसरा reason, this often gets overlooked, कि it has immense commercial and instrumental value. We don't have to look too far to find an example. अभी COVID-19 pandemic में, countries that have an established research culture and infrastructure, they were developing vaccines and they were sending them all across the globe, and they were making millions of dollars doing it. और हमारी contribution इस सारे में यही थी कि चाय के कप पे बैठ के डिस्कस कर रहे थे कि फाइजर ज़्यादा अच्छी है मॉडर्ना. We had no meaningful contributions in that. दूसरा कि it bridges communities and helps nurture a collaborative global research enterprise. Now, what does that mean? लेकिन जब आपका एक established research culture है, when you have research institutes, labs in Pakistan, so you're producing research academics who can then form research alliances, engage in research projects across the globe, किसी और country में जाके. Now that creates an inflow of new ideas, new tech, and more opportunities. Or similarly, आपके लोगों को भी ज़्यादा opportunities मिलती हैं to go overseas to work on large-scale projects. लेकिन what I think is the most important aspect of research, it's that simply put, it has high value to society. देखें, what research basically does is it recognizes the gaps in knowledge that we have, and it helps us better understand challenges and presents potential solutions to those challenges. Any nation that does not have the means to come up with solutions to its own problems, it can never prosper. I'll give you guys an example. Abhi, exclusive to Pakistan, there's a number of medical issues. Abhi, thalassemia ke ek zyada aggressive variant was popping up in Upper Punjab in families that have a lot of intermarriages. And there was a research project on it being carried out in Lahore. I think Children Complex Lahore की टीम थी. लेकिन ये एक हो गया. दूसरा, इंडिया में superbugs, antibiotic resistant bacterial strains हैं, जो क्योंकि वहाँ antibiotic misuse बहुत ज़्यादा है, और हमारे पास भी बहुत ज़्यादा है. We prescribe them like candies. और I'm pretty sure इधर भी होंगे, लेकिन we have no idea of it. क्योंकि solution क्या, we're not even aware of our problems. कि scale क्या problems के, we don't even know what we're up against. Or for a minute, if we think beyond medicine, Pakistan is primarily an agricultural country. This year, cotton में we've had major stunting. तो अगर आप expect कर रहे हैं कि कोई बाहर से आएगा, आपके थैलेसीमिया cases पढ़ेगा, बाहर से आके आपके superbugs study करेगा, antibiotic resistance study करेगा, और आपकी cotton study करेगा कि भाई क्यों आपकी yield कम है और why your nation is struggling, तो you're mistaken. That isn't gonna happen. So we need to be capable of solving our own problems. And the reason I'm sharing all of this is because I hope that we can change the way we think about research, change our attitude about research. Okay, with that out of the way, I'll get on with manuscript writing. So I'll try to keep it sweet and short. It's Thursday night, and I'm sure all of us are tired. So we have 4 basic objectives for today. Sabse pehle to we're going to get familiarized with the components of a research manuscript. Sections unke, ke what sections there are and what goes in them. Where we're going to try and appreciate how research papers are structured. Ke information from your research, how do you turn that into sentences, paragraphs, and how do you organize that information in your manuscript in order to effectively communicate what you've done to your audience, to your readers. Tisra, we're going to try and recognize science writing as a unique and distinct style of writing. Science writing is different. It sounds different. It's robotic. It's precise. It doesn't have any flowery phrases. Or in comparison to other forms of writing like literary writing, or short stories, novels mein milti hai, yeah, journalistic writing, legal writing, it's different. Like it's hard to teach somebody what science writing is, how to do it. Like it's something that comes with practice. We're going to try and distinguish it from other forms. In the end, we're going to try and gain practical experience throughout the session by engaging in a few writing exercises using a research scenario. So that will come up in a bit. But before anything, we're going to do a quick run through of what exactly is in a manuscript. There's 5 major sections, and the first is the abstract. Now, the abstract is basically a summary. That's it. That's all there is to it. Where the introduction. Introduction talks about why. It answers why you're doing what you're doing. It introduces the topic and it tells the reader why you're doing this. Materials may you go over how you're studying this topic. Results may you present the data that you've acquired using those materials and methods that you've applied to your study. In the end, discussion may you discuss those results. So just to go over them again, abstract may summary, introduction may you talk about why you're doing what you're doing, materials and methods may you talk about how you're doing it, results may you present the data that you generated, discussion may you discuss those results. So take a minute, go over the scenario. We're going to use this scenario to come up with sentences for the manuscript. So I'll give you guys 40 seconds to a minute, and then we'll go over it together. Right, so today we're going to imagine that we're all researchers at a leading research institute, Harvard, Hopkins, jo dil karta. And you, along with your team, have been studying the effects of a newly discovered immune molecule known as interleukin-37. That's all you need to know about it. Don't worry about it. All you need to know is that it's called interleukin-37. Now, previous reports have demonstrated that interleukin-37 reduces metastasis and tumor size in mice, so it has anti-cancer effects. However, there is a lack of understanding regarding how these anti-cancer effects take place. Now, this is a gap in knowledge. We know that it has anti-cancer effects, theek hai, lekin mechanism ke underlying. That's where you come in. That's where your research comes in. So you've been working to investigate the mechanism behind interleukin-37's anti-cancer effect. Or after years of persistent work, you finally uncovered that interleukin-37 mediates its effects by inhibiting a distinct cell signaling pathway. Naam nahi chahiye cell signaling pathway ka, all we need to know is that it's called 𝗥𝗘𝗦𝗘𝗥𝗖𝗓 isko, cell signaling pathway X. Now with all of that out of the way, we must write a manuscript to communicate our work and findings. तो इसको साथ लेके चलेंगे as we talk about each section. तो सबसे पहले, the title. Pretty straightforward, easy stuff. If you follow these 5 instructions, the title will basically write itself for you. Yeah, सबसे पहले तो point to the question and answer in your research. If we go back to the scenario, there's an obvious question here and an answer that you're looking to present. The question is कि ठीक है यार, anti-cancer effects हैं इस molecule के, लेकिन इनका mechanism unknown है. What is the mechanism? That is your question. The answer is कि the mechanism is through suppression of the cell signaling pathway X. Now, second, you need to place the most important words first. Tisra, use plain language. There's no need to complicate things. It needs to be easy to read and easy to write. Or Number 4, you use keywords. And number 5, you keep it short. If you do all of these things, your title should sound something like Interleukin-37 inhibits invasion and metastasis in non-small cell lung cancer. You have your keywords here. Interleukin-37 से start किया. Or the question भी इधर आ गया कि it does inhibit it, लेकिन how? Or you follow it with the answer by suppressing signaling pathway X. So it's pretty straightforward. If you practice it, it will come naturally to you. And after the title, we're going to talk about the abstract. This is also very straightforward. So an abstract is basically a summary of your entire manuscript. It's typically written at the end. You have to restrict yourself to 200 to 300 words. Because a common mistake is that people end up writing too much in the abstract. And it has tiny sections for all of the major sections of your manuscript. Background ho gaya, methods, results, or conclusion from your discussion. Or iska purpose hai कि it's a teaser, a trailer for the information to follow. लेकिन आपने नई information introduce नहीं करनी abstract में. It should only be a trailer for what's to follow. Or the way I think about it is कि अगर आपके जो sections हैं, background हो गया, methods हो गया, if they only had 2 to 4 sentences to scream out their entire essence, their entire purpose, what would those 2 to 4 sentences be? If you can think about them and write them down, they'll be good for the abstract. That's all there is to it. You slap it on the first page or you move on to the actual manuscript, which is, and that brings you to the first section of your manuscript, which is the introduction. The introduction is my least favorite section to write. It involves a lot of prior reading and research. So first thing is you should keep it between 300 to 500 words. Or the purpose of an introduction is to answer the question why. इसके लिए you need to be like that annoying, curious बच्चा who always asks क्यों. So ठीक है, you're doing research, you have a molecule, interleukin-37. You're studying its effects on cancer. क्यों भाई? क्योंकि it's been shown to have anti-cancer effects. Why are you studying those? क्योंकि ताकि we can expand our understanding of cancer metastasis and maybe we can come up with a new therapeutic approach for it. Why would you want to do that? Because cancer is a major burden on the world. It takes a lot of lives and we need to counter it. So either aake, when you reach to the top, broad base, kyun pooch ke, that is where you start the introduction. Or you narrow it down to your research aim, which is the objective of your research. So you start with why are you even doing this research? Cancer research है, cancer के खिलाफ therapeutic agent, अपनी understanding expand करनी है. वहाँ से जाते you answer all the whys in the process, and then you come to your research objective. Why you're doing the exact specific thing that you're doing, which is testing your molecule's mechanism by which it exerts anti-cancer effects. So that image you see on the right is basically it represents this entire process. So you start at a broad base and then you narrow it down. So this inverted triangle is exactly what you're supposed to follow while writing the introduction. And another approach that you can follow is this 4-step approach that I have on the slide. सबसे पहले you provide background information about cancer, क्या disease burden है, क्या mortality rates हैं उसके. फिर you bring it closer to your specific topic, which is the effects of interleukin-37 on lung cancer. You introduce it, how interleukin-37 kya hai, what kind of molecule is it, why is it being studied in relation to lung cancer. Here you're going to further narrow it down. Topic ho gaya, you're going to narrow it down to your research question, ke mechanism kya hai of its anti-cancer effects. Isme you're going to mention past attempts. Ke obviously in isolation research nahi hogi. Simultaneously और भी लोग स्टडी कर रहे हैं interleukin-37 के एंटी कैंसर इफेक्ट्स, वो भी एक्सप्लेन करना चाह रहे हैं. वो किस एंगल से अप्रोच कर रहे हैं. अगर आप सेल सिग्नलिंग पाथवे X देख रहे हैं तो वो कौन से देख रहे हैं. What is the work that's being done on the topic currently? उन रिपोर्ट्स को आप यहाँ पे इंट्रोड्यूस करेंगे. In the end, you're gonna mention your specific research aim. Okay, by studying what I'm studying, I hope to explain the anti-cancer effects, the mechanistic underlying mechanism for the anti-cancer effects of interleukin-37, And there you have it. That's your introduction. Uske baad, we have the methods section. Easiest section to write. There's no thinking involved here. Isme you simply list down everything that you've done in the study. And you should break it down into subsections. Obviously, आपकी study में सिर्फ एक phase नहीं होगा, उसमें सिर्फ एक experiment नहीं होगा. You're going to have multiple experiments, and each of those experiments should get a subsection. That makes it easier to write and also makes it easier for the reader. And it should be written in the past tense. Okay, cell lines were cultured, proteins were isolated. Present tense, it has to be in the past tense. And the entire goal of this is replicability. अगर आप अपनी लैब में पाकिस्तान में बैठ के स्टडी कर रहे हैं ये और इंटरलूकिन 37 के इफेक्ट्स, तो कहीं स्वीडन या कहीं भी दुनिया में जाके अगर कोई रेप्लिकेट करेगा आपके मेथड्स एग्जैक्टली एज दे आर, दे शुड गेट द सेम रिजल्ट्स. मतलब आपकी लैब में इंटरलूकिन 37 एंटी कैंसर इफेक्ट्स दिखा रहा है तो पूरी दुनिया में दिखाना चाहिए. ऐसे नहीं होना चाहिए कि सिर्फ आपके पास एंटी कैंसर इफेक्ट्स हैं, बाहर कहीं इफेक्ट ही नहीं है. तो इफ वी फ्रेज इट आउट, तो मेथड्स एंड मटेरियल्स में इस तरह होगा. I've highlighted different experiments. Each color corresponds to a different experiment done for the study. एक हो गया lung cancer cells were cultured. ठीक है. Cell invasion and metastasis were detected. Protein expression were detected using Western blotting. RNA expression was detected using PCR. Ab, in the actual section, you're going to start with these sentences or explain everything. Reagent कहाँ से आया, cancer cells कहाँ से मंगाए थे, manufacturer कौन है, कौन सी equipment use की, everything, क्योंकि ताकि somebody can replicate it exactly. अब असल section में obviously these are going to be the first sentences for your subsection. लेकिन अगर if you take all of those sentences, match them together, तो इस तरह की एक summary बनती है. ये abstract के लिए perfect है. लेकिन method section में इन सब कलर कोडेड सेंटेंसेस के नीचे पूरी एक्सप्लेनेशंस होंगी कि वेस्टर्न ब्लॉटिंग हुई कैसे हुई, इस एक्सपेरिमेंट को कैसे किया, एग्जैक्टली पूरी रेसिपी देनी है. मूविंग ऑन टू द रिजल्ट्स. अब obviously those methods and materials will yield results. Now your job is to present those results. Again, we have a 4-step approach that makes it very easy to write the results. सबसे पहले तो you restate the question. Why was the experiment done in the first place? जिसका data present करने जा रहे हैं. उसको, if you phrase that out, it will sound something like, to determine whether X signaling pathway is involved in the effects of anti-invasion that interleukin 37 mediates, we measured the expression of proteins involved in X signaling pathway. मतलब ठीक है कि experiment किया, protein देख रहे थे. क्यों देख रहे थे protein यार? देखने के लिए कि वो protein levels गिरे थे in response to interleukin या नहीं गिरे थे. उसके बाद after you've introduced the question behind the experiment, the question that the experiment was designed to answer, you'll explain the experimental approach. Okay, how exactly did the results come about? What exactly did you do? RNA extract किया, कैसे extract किया? उसमें you briefly mentioned that these were the reagents used. Manufacturer का नाम भी डाल दो if you have to. मैं इधर जितनी detail डालोगे बेहतर है. Or the approach used, reverse transcription was used, or using what kit. Then you present the actual result. कि हाँ भाई, signaling protein expression was lower. Now, what does that mean? So you explain that. कि हाँ भाई, the results suggest that the inhibitory effects of interleukin 37 on lung cancer might be correlated with the down-regulated proteins. Down-regulation आपने study की, notice की, और आपने उसको tie back किया कि ये protein की down-regulation is linked to the research question that we had. So that wraps up the results. Now, the most important part of your manuscript, the discussion. Now, पीछे results में you presented the results and you explained them. अब you're going to discuss them. You're going to interpret them. अब interpretation कैसे करनी है? It has to proceed in a stepwise fashion. Either I've noted down the questions that your interpretation should answer and address. Or bottom of the page पे आपकी examples हैं कि if you phrase them out, what do they sound like? What should they sound like? The interpretation you should always start with whether the study confirmed or denied your hypothesis. Or इसका अगर sentence निकालेंगे तो you'll probably say something like the study demonstrates a correlation between my molecule or the proteins I was studying. या अगर आपने ना confirm किया ना deny किया, कोई effect नहीं observe, ना down regulate हुआ protein ना up regulate हुआ, तो कोई और चीज, कोई alternative hypothesis है, so you would phrase that out as contrary to the hypothesized association, something entirely different was noticed. Or you talk about that कि नहीं भाई interleukin 37 ना उसको suppress किया था ना increase किया था, लेकिन it did something else. कुछ भी हो सकता. Or फिर you share your major interpretation कि हाँ, the results indicate that my molecule did suppress that pathway and on. What does that mean? आगे जाएंगे आप फिर उसके बाद do results agree with other research? Obviously, your research, like I said, is not happening in isolation. और भी reports exist करती हैं, बाकी लोग भी study कर रहे हैं, उनको उनके claims आपने corroborate करने हैं अपने साथ, या अगर वो contrasting reports हैं तो आपने बताना है कि क्यों हो सकता है. So if you phrase that out, it should sound like the results might suggest that X, whatever X is. However, based on the findings of a similar study, a more plausible explanation is X plus Y. So you incorporate other findings into your discussion along with your findings. और उसके बाद you talk about the limitations of your study. Or if you phrase that out, it should sound like due to the lack of data on X, the results cannot confirm. इसके लिए एक और example, a less experimental example would be if you're studying the prevalence of sexually transmitted diseases in Pakistan. We're a conservative society, or when you're sharing your results, so you need to address the fact that the responses may not be completely accurate. So इस तरह की limitations, drawbacks, sources of error इधर आपने suggest करनी है, whatever your study might be. Then in the end, implications. What has your study done for the field? What do you know now that you did not know before? Usme, a sentence could be, the data contributes a clearer understanding of the effects of interleukin 7, ya kuch bhi. In the end, you suggest future research directions. If further research is needed to establish a stronger correlation, a causative relation. So that should be your roadmap. This ensures a logical flow of ideas, or haphazard nahi hota. You're not jumping from one point to the other. So that should cover the discussion. And that's your manuscript. In the end, I'll just share a couple important tips to remember. So transitions are your friend. The words and phrases that you see in bold are connecting phrases and connecting words. I have a paragraph here from an actual research paper. इसमें से मैंने connecting words or phrases निकाल दिए. So if you try reading it, malaria infections have decreased, malaria drug usage has decreased, hospitalizations have decreased. The conclusion is bed nets are decreasing the incidence of malaria. Now, if you add those connecting phrases and words, it makes much more sense and it's easier to read. So it ends up sounding like malaria infections have decreased, suggesting that bed nets are impacting malaria transmission. Similarly, hospitalizations have decreased, lending additional support to this hypothesis. Furthermore, malaria drug usage has decreased. Thus, therefore, it seems likely that bed nets are effective. So you should use a lot of these in your paragraphs and between them. They'll make the flow of the paper much more smooth. And one more thing to recognize is that in a paragraph, the first and last sentence are power positions. If you try reading this paragraph, you'll realize that the first and last sentences of a paragraph are the power positions. So you use those stress positions to your advantage. The middle sentences, they often get buried. And that is exactly what the paragraph says. So you need to put the most important sentence point of your paragraph in the first sentence, or in the end, you need to reiterate that point. Usko वापसी दोहराओ, ताकि the point gets through. Or in the end, I talked about science writing and how it sounds different. So I have a few comparisons here. Looked at ki jagah you use examined. There is no doubt that ki jagah clearly due to the fact that ki jagah, because vast majority of ki jagah, most utilized ki jagah use at this point in time ki jagah currently, or in spite of the fact ki jagah although. So you'll notice the trend ke instead of phrases you have single words, it's concise and to the point, or there's no room for flowery language like at this point in time you have vast majority of. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. Or if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Questions तो नहीं है. Thank you so much for your time. एक question है, एक second. मोहम्मद फ़ाइक अली पूछ रहे हैं कि coming from a rural background, I was intrigued by when you talk about research in reference to agriculture. Could you please shed some light on research, on how research can improve Pakistan's agricultural problems?
Right. So the point that I was making then was okay, research has far-reaching advantages even beyond medicine. So agriculture, Pakistan is primarily an agricultural country. That's how we pay our bills. So उसमें भी you need research to prepare yourself against challenges that might show up, और challenges आ रहे हैं. आपकी cotton growing belts are suffering, अनार growing regions in South Punjab उन्होंने छोड़ दिया अनार उगाना क्योंकि diseases थी जिनका कोई explanation ही नहीं था. Research department सर खुजा रहे थे और इनकी potential solutions, we're all suffering for it, research से ही आएंगे. Or we need to establish a research culture to tackle those problems. So, yeah. Thank you for the question.
Yay questions, and thank you so much for being here and taking out time. फिलहाल यही questions और questions होंगे तो आपका email है हमारे पास, ज़रूर contact कर लेंगे आपको. So with this, we come to an end to this wonderful session. Thank you so much for being here with us or taking out time. It was a very interactive session. ये सारी videos saved हैं. अगर किसी ने देखनी है तो HSE के page पे हैं, आप वहाँ से देख सकते हैं. और emails provide की गई हैं. अगर किसी ने कोई question contact करना है तो आप ज़रूर पूछ सकते हैं. Thank you so much for taking out time and for being here with us. Thank you.